The church bell tolled noon across the little town of Red Fern, its iron tongue striking with a sound that felt more like judgment than blessing. Each ring drifted over the flat plains, over the crooked fence lines and dust-blown porches, until it seemed the whole land had stopped to listen. On the chapel steps, people gathered in clusters, men with sun-creased faces, women fanning themselves in the dry heat, children restless in their Sunday best. There was a particular tension in the air, the kind that prickles skin, born not of reverence but of anticipation. For the folks of Red Fern had come less to honor love and more to witness a spectacle. And then she appeared, Clara May Hensley. 30 years old, carried herself down the aisle with a courage that quivered at the edges. Her hair, pale as corn silk, was pinned beneath a lace veil that trembled with each nervous step. The dress, stitched by her own hands, was a shade too tight across her broad shoulders, the seams straining to contain the soft roundness of her frame. She was heavier than most women, fuller, fleshier, and for that alone, she had long been the subject of whispers. The whispers sharpened now, rustling through the pews like dry grass in the wind. A boy stifled a laugh, failing, and his snicker echoed in the quiet chapel. A pair of women tilted their heads together, lips curling as they muttered, "Lord, look at her." Like a sow in silk, Clara May heard it all, every sound louder than the last. But she kept walking. Her hands clutched a small bouquet of prairie blossoms, petals trembling as much as her breath. For this was the day she had dreamed of since girlhood, the day she believed might prove her worthy of being loved. At the altar stood Earl Jennings, her groom-to-be. He was a rancher's son, tall and lean, his hair slicked back, his collar stiff with borrowed dignity. He shifted from foot to foot, face pale under the weight of 100 eyes. Clara May lifted her gaze to him, hoping for reassurance, for the quiet nod that says, "We're in this together." But Earl's eyes darted away. His jaw tightened. The silence stretched until it broke like brittle glass. I can't," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. At first, Clara May thought she'd misheard. But then Earl stepped back, his boots scraping the wooden floor, and the truth struck her harder than any bullet. He turned, shoulders hunched, and walked down the aisle, past her, past the minister, past every stunned face, leaving her alone before God and everyone. The bouquet slipped from Clara May's fingers, scattering flowers across the boards like little graves. A murmur rose, quick and cruel. Gasps gave way to laughter, the sound swelling until it pressed against the chapel walls. Some shook their heads in pity, others smirked, children giggled without restraint. The sound was not a wound. It was 100 wounds, all at once. Clara May stood frozen, heart cracking under the weight of humiliation. Her cheeks burned, her breath came ragged, and the veil blurred with tears she could not hide. Then, unable to endure another second, she gathered her skirts and fled, down the aisle, through the doors into the blinding sun. Dust kicked up beneath her shoes as she ran, and behind her, the laughter followed like a pack of hounds. Somewhere in that cruel chorus, a small voice rose, clear and unspoiled, but Clara May was already too far gone to hear. The plains received her in silence. The wide sky stretched merciless and endless, the horizon shimmering with heat. She ran until her lungs burned, until the chapel's spire was a distant blur. Her dress snagged on sagebrush, tearing seams already strained, and still she pressed on, driven by shame more than will. At last, when her body gave out, she collapsed inside the husk of a forgotten barn 2 miles from town. The rafters above were split and crooked, shafts of light falling through in pale streaks. The air smelled of dust and old straw, dry as parchment. Clara May pulled the veil from her head and crushed it in her fists. She pressed her face into her knees, sobs breaking from her chest in jagged waves. All her life she had been told to be grateful if any man so much as looked her way. And now, even the one who had promised to wed her had chosen public shame over keeping his word. The words of the townsfolk echoed in her skull, each one another stone cast. Sow, cow, unworthy. That night she slept fitfully on the hay-strewn floor, the cold gnawing through lace and cotton. When the wind howled through the gaps, she thought it mocked her too. By morning, she wished she would not wake at all. But fate, in its quiet mercy, does not always leave the broken to rot. The creak of saddle leather and the soft thud of boots stirred her awake. A shadow filled the barn door. Jedediah Cole stepped inside, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat dusty from the trail. At 35, he was a man carved by labor and land, skin weathered, hands calloused, silence worn like armor. He scanned the broken barn with steady eyes that missed little. At his side stood a girl of 6, hair in pale braids, clutching his calloused hand. Mary Beth Cole, with eyes wide as morning sky, peered into the dimness and spotted the figure crumpled against the wall. Clara May tried to shrink into herself, shame prickling her skin. She must have looked pitiful, dress torn, eyes swollen, veil crumpled like a rag. Jed spoke first, his voice low, edged with curiosity but not mockery. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "you're trespassing in my hayloft. But I reckon you're worse for wear than the boards holding it up." Clara May blinked at him, startled by the lack of scorn. She braced for laughter, for judgment, but none came. His eyes held her without flinching, just steady, quiet observation. Mary Beth tugged on her father's hand, then whispered with the blunt honesty of a child. "Daddy, she's pretty." The words struck Clara May like a bullet to the heart, not in pain, but in disbelief. Pretty. No one had ever said it, not like that, not with such clear and innocent certainty. Her lips trembled. Tears burned again, but softer now. Jed looked down at his daughter, then back at Clara May. He gave a slow, thoughtful nod, as if agreeing with the child. He did not smile, but his silence spoke louder than 100 grins, and for the first time since that cruel day began, warmth stirred in Clara May's chest, a thread of light through a world gone dark. The days that followed bound her to the Coles homestead, though she told herself it was only temporary. Jed did not press her with questions. He simply set her to small tasks, feeding the chickens, carrying water, helping Mary Beth with her stitching. Work steadied her, gave her hands purpose when her heart still faltered. At supper, they sat together at the wooden table, Jed quiet, Mary Beth chattering. Clara May listened more than she spoke, yet she found herself smiling at the child's tales, laughter bubbling where she thought it dead. But Redfern did not stay silent. Gossip spread like wildfire across the town, the jilted bride hiding on Jed Cole's ranch. Some called her shameless. Others said Jed had taken pity, the way one might rescue a stray animal. Every whisper reached Clara May's ears, stinging like nettles. Still, Jed never repeated a word of it. He moved steady through his days, the gossip sliding off him like rain off rock. In his silence, Clara May found something stronger than pity. She found shelter, and slowly, a fragile seed of dignity began to take root. But peace in the Wild West is never left untested. It was a Saturday when Clara May first dared to ride back into Redfern. Jed hitched the wagon for supplies, Mary Beth bouncing at his side, begging for penny candy. Clara May had intended to remain at the ranch, hidden from the wagging tongues. But when the girl pressed her small hand into hers, she could not refuse. So she went. Dressed in plain calico instead of silk, veil long discarded. Her hair was tied simply, her face bare. She braced herself as the wagon rolled down the dirt road into the town that had broken her. Redfern greeted her with silence first, then whispers. Heads turned, voices pricked the air like thorns. There she is, the one left at the altar. Hiding out with Jed Cole, so they say. Clara May kept her chin down, her pulse hammering. Every step felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. At the general store, 2 women lingered in the doorway, blocking her path. One smirked, folding her arms. Well, if it ain't the bride that never was. The other chuckled. Heard you moved quick. Already setting up house with Jed, ain't you? Mary Beth stiffened beside her. Jed's hand hovered near the doorframe, his eyes narrowing. But Clara May drew a breath before he could speak. Best step aside, she said softly. Her voice shaking but steady enough to carry. The women raised their brows but moved, muttering under their breath. Clara May walked past them, every muscle trembling. Yet inside her chest a small spark glowed, proof she had not been crushed entirely. The true test came at dusk. When the wagon rattled past the saloon, the doors swung open and a group of cowhands spilled out, laughter thick with whiskey. Among them was Earl Jennings, the man who had humiliated her at the altar. His hat sat crooked on his head, his boots scuffed with dust, his swagger more cruel than proud. "Well, look who it is," he jeered, raising his bottle high. "My runaway bride." The men roared with laughter, their voices echoing down the street. Clara May froze, her breath locking in her chest. Earl staggered closer, squinting at her with mockery. "How's life out on the coal ranch? Keeping his bed warm yet? Or does he need a wider frame for that?" The men slapped their knees, howling. Clara May's face burned hot. The old shame clawed back, dragging her to the chapel floor where flowers scattered at her feet. She wanted to shrink, to vanish. But then, small fingers tightened around her hand. Mary Beth, eyes bright and unafraid, looked up at her father and then at the drunken men. Her voice rang clear, piercing the laughter like a church bell through fog. "She is pretty." The street stilled. The cowhands blinked, startled. Earl's grin faltered into a sneer. "Pretty?" he spat. "That's what you call it, girl? She's a cow in a dress, and she knows it." The words meant to wound met a silence thicker than smoke. Jed's voice rumbled low, steady as distant thunder. "That's enough." He stepped forward, his shadow cutting long across the dirt. One hand rested easy on the butt of his revolver, not drawn, not threatening, but enough to remind any man what line he was standing near. Earl laughed, hollow, and took another swig. But before he could strike again, Clara May lifted her chin. Her voice trembled, but each word grew stronger. "You may see a cow, Earl, but your daughter will grow up remembering the day she watched a man shame a woman for the body God gave her. That'll be your legacy." The crowd shifted uneasily. Men glanced at one another, shame seeping through their drunken haze. Even Earl wavered, the grin sliding from his face. Jed's eyes locked on him, steady and cold. "Get on your way, Earl." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, muttering curses, Earl spat in the dirt and stumbled back toward the saloon, his companions dragging him along. The laughter had gone hollow. The street, once so loud, fell into a silence that rang sharper than any gunshot. Clara May's knees threatened to give, but Jed's arm was there, steadying her. For one fleeting heartbeat, she let herself lean into him, drawing warmth from the strength that held her up. Mary Beth looked between them, beaming, her small voice triumphant. "Told you, Daddy. She's pretty." Back at the ranch that night, Clara May sat on the porch long after Mary Beth had been tucked into bed. The sky stretched wide, black velvet stitched with stars, the prairie hushed except for the low song of crickets. Jed joined her quietly, lowering himself onto the step beside her. Neither spoke for a while. His presence was enough, steady as the land itself. At last, she whispered, "I don't know why you let me stay. I've brought nothing but gossip to your door." Jed kept his gaze on the horizon, voice low and even. "This land don't run on gossip. It runs on hands that work. Yours have done plenty." She turned her eyes toward him. For the first time in her life, she did not feel judged when caught in a man's gaze. His silence wasn't dismissal. It was respect. And something deep within her, bruised and battered, began to knit itself whole. Weeks slipped into months. Clara May found herself laughing in small, unexpected bursts, laughing at Mary Beth's stubbornness, at Jed's rare dry jokes, at the way the chickens refused to stay penned. She mended harnesses with Jed in the barn, her hand steady beside his. She baked bread that filled the house with warmth, stitched new dresses for Mary Beth, tended the garden with diligence. There was no grand romance, no sweeping declarations. What grew between her and Jed was slower, truer, a bond stitched from shared work, from glances held a heartbeat too long, from the quiet brush of hands across a supper table neither pulled away from. The ranch became less a refuge, more a home. But in the Wild West, peace was never safe for long. It was a storm-tossed night when bandits swept through Red Fern. The livery went up in flames. Cattle were driven off, and gunshots split the rain. Word carried fast across the plains, reaching even the Cole ranch. Jed saddled his horse, rifle strapped to his back, his jaw set hard. They'll come for the outlying places next. Clara May's heart pounded, but she stepped forward. You won't fight this alone. And she didn't. Through the night's deluge, they stood side by side at the edge of the ranch yard, Jed with his rifle, Clara May with a shotgun cradled in her arms. Rain plastered her hair to her face, her calico dress clinging heavy, but she did not flinch. Once she had run from jeers. Tonight she faced fire. When shadows moved at the fence line, Clara May's finger tightened on the trigger, voice steady as she called to Jed. Left side! Together they fired, the shots cracking through the storm, driving the raiders back. By dawn, the bandits were gone, the cattle safe, the ranch still standing, and Clara May, once mocked and discarded, had stood like stone against the storm. Red Fern whispered still, but never the same. No one forgot the sight of Clara May Hensley, shotgun in hand, shoulders squared against the rain, standing beside Jed Cole as his equal, and on a morning painted soft with sunrise, Mary Beth's words returned like prophecy fulfilled. She is pretty, Daddy, not because of lace or slimness or the shallow approval of gossip, but because a woman who rises from shame, who finds her courage in the face of cruelty, shines with a beauty no jeer can touch. So if the world has ever laughed at you, tried to weigh your worth on a crooked scale, remember Clara May. Remember how a child's unclouded eyes saw what others refused to see. True beauty is not found in their applause. It lives in the quiet resilience of the soul, in the courage to stand tall after you've been broken. And that kind of beauty, it lingers longer than the prairie sky,